When I was young, I thought that snails were kind of stupid. I mean, they seem to have very simple needs, right? Give them some lettuce and watch them slowly go from one place to another. But as I got older and learned more about snails, I realized that they're actually way more complex than I originally thought. For instance, did you know that if a snail gets too hot or too cold, it can literally melt or freeze? That doesn't sound possible, but it's true. Snails are so sensitive to temperature changes that they need to carefully regulate their body temperature. And just like us, they prefer warmer temperatures. In fact, there's a perfect temperature range for each species of snail, and anything outside of that range can be deadly. For example, most garden snails cannot tolerate temperatures below freezing or above 86 degrees Fahrenheit. And even within that range, they still need to find shade or they'll overheat. So contrary to popular belief, snails are not always out in the sun baking. They actually spend most of their time hiding in the shade or underground where it's cooler. If it gets too hot or too cold, they'll simply retreat into their shells and wait for the temperature to return to normal. This is actually a really effective strategy since their metabolism slows down so much when they re-in their shell that they can survive for months without food or water. During these times, they basically enter a state called torpor, which is kind of like hibernation or a really long nap. Some people have even reported finding snails in their gardens that have been in torpor for up to 3 years straight. So when you see a snail in your garden, don't be fooled by its seemingly slow and simple behavior. It's actually a highly evolved creature with some pretty impressive survival instincts. Speaking of survival instincts, you may have heard that if a snail loses its shell, it will die. And while this is true for most species of snails, there is one species of snail that can actually regenerate its shell if it loses it. These snails are called patelogastropods. They're only found in a few places in the world, such as the Bahamas and the Florida Keys. And if you've seen one of these amazing creatures, you might think that it has a really tough shell. And while their shells are definitely strong, they're not invincible. If a predator gets a hold of a patelogastropod, it can easily break off a piece of its shell. And this can be fatal because the snail's body is soft and squishy without its shell protecting it. However, these snails have evolved a way to deal with this problem. If a patelogastrope loses a piece of its shell, it can actually grow a new shell. This process takes several weeks to complete, and the new shell is not the same as the old one. It's smaller and thinner, and it lacks the beautiful colors and patterns of the original shell. But it does the job of protecting the snail's body. So while this adaptation is not perfect, it's definitely better than having no shell at all. So next time you come across a snail, remember that it's a highly evolved creature with some pretty impressive adaptations. It may seem slow and simple, but it's actually much more complex than it appears. Who knows? Maybe it's smarter than you think. Well, that's all for now. I hope you learned something new about snails. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.